every decision creates culture. Culture is not created during annual meetings. It's not created because a policy exists. It is not created by mission statements displayed on office walls. And of course, culture is created by what people experience every single day. The way we welcome new players, the way there's one important moment that every coach hopes never comes, and yet every coach must be prepared for. And it is the moment when an athlete quietly asks, "Coach, can I talk to you?" So those 4 words carry enormous significance. And in that moment, again, football is no longer the priority. Winning is no longer the priority. Selection is no longer the priority. A person has chosen you as someone they trust. One conversation handled well can become the beginning of protection, healing, and support. And the same conversation handled badly can reinforce fear, silence, and isolation. And the first words you speak should communicate 3 things. 1, I think culture can be summed up in one simple question. How do we do things around here? The question is answered every single day. The way coaches correct mistakes, the way teammates speak to one another, the way referees are treated, the way parents are welcome. Coaching has never simply been about producing a better athlete. It has always been about developing better people. When people hear the word harm, they often immediately think of physical injury. But in sport, again, harm can take many different forms. An athlete, for example, may be repeatedly humiliated in front of teammates until they begin losing confidence. Could be talking about a child may feel pressure to compete while injured because, again, they fear disappointing the coach. Compliance versus culture. Often we explain the differences like this.
Good evening. So good to be here. Dear coaches, dear Grassroots club owners, and distinguished guests. I am so delighted, of course, to be back again as your moderator for another powerful seminar organized by the Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation. Welcome, of course, welcome to everyone, wherever you're tuned in from. And today, like I mentioned, we will be discussing safeguarding in sport. And first off, I must give a shout out to every coach who has been consistent to these seminars organized by the Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation. We want to tell you that we see you every single time and we truly appreciate you for your attendance. Yes, we have a question for you as usual to start things off. And the question is, does your club or team currently have a written safeguarding policy? Does your club or team currently have a written safeguarding policy? Please type in the chat yes or no. We look forward to your answers. I will also be checking as well. And please, you can start asking any questions you might have about this topic. You've already known about the topic before now. So any questions you already have, we have a Q&A feature. The Q&A feature also allows you to post your questions anonymously, especially about a sensitive issue like this one. Now, just to let you know, to access this Q&A feature, click on the meeting tools icon in the bottom right corner of your screen. So this icon is just beside the chat icon. Then when you click on it, you also click on Q&A. Then you can submit a question by clicking on the Ask a Question button. So after typing your question, you just click Post. If you want to post it anonymously, you just need to tick the option for Post Anonymously. So I hope that this is clear and you'll be able to use this Q&A feature. We will be going there to check for your questions as we progress. The Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation, as you already know, was launched by Super Falcons captain and PSG star Rasheedat Ajibade in 2023. And this foundation deserves enormous credit for its life-changing sports education and skill development programs and initiatives, including sponsoring 25 grassroots coaches to upgrade their knowledge at the National Institute for Sports in Lagos this year. Not to mention the countless insightful workshops, lectures, seminars, such as this one. Last week, we had the legal masterclass, which taught us how to uphold our contractual rights and obligations, among other things. Today, we have safeguarding in sport on the front burner. A really sensitive topic that is a top priority for sports federations across the world, including FIFA. Because for sports to thrive and be a safe haven for all, its environment must denounce all forms of violence, abuse, and discrimination, and promote the physical and mental well-being of everyone involved. So, don't forget, drop your questions in our Q&A feature. The Q&A feature also allows you to post anonymously. All right. As we all know, our dear host, Rasheedat Ajibade, is currently on international assignment. We are now counting days to the Women's Africa Cup of Nations. And as the captain, Rasheedat will be leading the Super Falcons as they look to defend their title and also qualify for the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil. Hopefully she'll be joining us later. Yes, in the session to share a few words with all of us. But in the meantime, you already know that she values you highly and it's always her heart's desire, of course, that you are equipped for greatness in your career. So, like I said, start dropping your questions. We'll be introducing our guest speaker very soon. Safeguarding in sport is the topic. But first, I need to remind you that this is a sensitive topic and this space is for learning, not judgment. If anything raises questions about your own environment, our Q&A is a safe space to ask your questions, and you can also ask these questions anonymously. We will be introducing our guest very shortly. Our guest today is the ever amazing Khayran Noor. She's widely celebrated for her trailblazing work in athlete safeguarding, human rights, and sports governance. So Khayran Noor is the founding director of Sports Legal and the respected international sports lawyer, safeguarding expert, and advocate of the High Court of Kenya. She is also a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and holds a Master of Laws in Sports Law and Practice from De Montfort University, United Kingdom. She is the author of the Safeguarding in Sport Framework, a landmark blueprint designed to promote safe, inclusive, and accountable sports ecosystem across Africa, grounded in international human rights standards. Well, I need to be sure that she's here. Of course she is. Join me, guys, as I welcome Khayran Noor from Kenya. She's going to be speaking to us right now. Welcome, Khayran.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction and also for this opportunity to discuss this, as you said, very sensitive topic. I wouldn't call, okay, I mean, it's I would say a volatile one, a new one, and of course, something that touches on very sensitive matters and very crucial issues, especially in the African context. We're still sort of navigating this space, and trying to figure out how to safeguard our athletes and safeguard all our stakeholders in sport. So it's a very it's a huge honor and a great opportunity for me to be able to do this with you guys. And thank you so much for all of you for making the time to be here today. So maybe just to humble myself, I wouldn't exactly say expert. It's a very huge weight to carry, but I would say safeguarding practitioner and a specialization area or area of focus. So I might not have all the answers for you today, but I will try my best to, give you as much information as I can to the best of my knowledge. And of course, for any questions that you might have, as has been already mentioned, that you can put that in the Q&A, and I'll secure some time, hopefully because there's a lot of content to cover, or rather, I would like to give as much knowledge as I can today. So I'll hopefully be able to secure 10 minutes towards the end of this session to cover Q&A. But without much further ado, hopefully we can go ahead. I hope that's the procedure. I don't know how to say your name.
Chivogu, I understand. You can go ahead, of course. The floor is yours.
I don't want to butcher it. So, but yeah, hugely honored to be here. And let me just put my slides on. And I believe the same would be shared with you after the session. So, although I haven't put too much content on it, and I also believe the session is recorded. So, should you need to clarify anything after the session, I've also shared my LinkedIn profile there, so you can follow me, connect with me, and should you have any other queries or any further assistance after this session, I'm more than happy to be of assistance. So once again, good evening, everyone, and again, it is a huge or genuine privilege to be with you today. And I would like to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to Rasheedat Ajibade and, of course, the Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation for inviting me to contribute to this important conversation. And I also wish to commend the foundation, of course, for its commitment to investing in culture education and general education towards all stakeholders in sport through the National Institute for the Sports Coaching Education Scholarship Program. And for me, I've always believed that one of the greatest investments you can make in sport is not simply investing in athletes, it is investing in coaches, because coaches shape the, experiences. And as we move along, we'll expand more on this. They influence the character, and they also create environments where young people either flourish or struggle. So every investment in a coach is in many respects an investment in the future of sport itself. So to everyone joining us today, whether you're a football coach, youth development practitioner, educator, volunteer, administrator, thank you for making the time to be here. And the fact that you have chosen to spend the next 2 hours reflecting on safeguarding also tells me something important. It tells me that you recognize coaching is about far more than developing technical ability. It's about developing the people. So that, in my view, is one of the greatest privileges and responsibilities any coach can have. So hope my slides are moving. Yeah, so before we speak about safeguarding, however, I would just like us to begin, and the same question that was posed to you earlier, of course, you can put that in the Q&A chat. I would like us to begin somewhere entirely different. So I would like us to begin with sport itself. So whenever safeguarding is discussed, of course, our instinct is often to jump immediately into policies, procedures, reporting mechanisms, and even the legal responsibilities. I mean, those are all important, and we will come to them shortly. But before we discuss protecting sport, I think we first need to remind ourselves why sport exists in the first place. So just a simple question to all of you, put that in the chat. Maybe I'll just have a look briefly before we proceed. In just one word, why do people play sport? In your opinion, in your perspective, as coaches, maybe as former players yourself or athletes, just something in the chat. Why do people play sport? Just one word. And maybe I can just have a look and see what some of the responses are coming in. Yes, I can see.
I can see them out if you want.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So Isioma Odili says to enjoy, and Victoria says recreation. You guys can keep your answers coming in. Oh, there's more. BJ says therapy. Interesting. Blessing says to stay healthy. So keep your answers coming. Izuchuku says for business purposes. Interesting. Okay, we have some more answers. Why do Why do people play sport? Keep your answers coming through. We want to have more answers. I mean, these answers have actually been diverse. We've seen the recreational part, the business part, the therapeutic part, and for money. Ugochukwu says for money. Balaji says passion and fun in the beginning. And then afterwards, money, right? Destiny says for fitness, hobby, business, and more. Oluwale says sports makes a man to be built holistically. And Paul says recreation to make money. Read one says passion. Wow, interesting answers coming through. Khayran.
Yes, I mean, we can already see, as you said, interesting answers and, of course, wonderful responses coming through. And like you said, also diverse in the sense that everyone is sort of having a different perspective as to why people play sport. And I think what strikes me is that nobody has mentioned policies or regulations. And of course, instead, you've spoken about, making money, recreation, health purposes, passion, enjoyment, business purposes. And I think that tells us something important, because people don't come to sport because they're looking for governance structures. They come because they're looking for positive experiences. And that, of course, means safeguarding isn't about protecting policies, it's about protecting the very reason people come to sport in the first place. So just generally, and of course, again, if you look at it, what's fascinating is that no matter where this conversation, of course, takes place, whether we're in Lagos, Abuja, Nairobi, Cairo, Johannesburg, London, or Buenos Aires, the answers are almost always the same, because people come to sport because they believe it offers something positive, as we've said earlier. And again, also in the same, when you're talking about children, very few children begin playing football in this perspective because they dream of becoming elite athletes. They play because it is fun, because their friends are there, because someone encouraged them, and because it makes them feel that they belong. And also sports represents positivity, because again, it creates confidence, it creates resilience, it builds friendships, and it opens doors that many young people never imagined possible. So for some children, the football pitch becomes the safest place they know. That is of course, an extraordinary privilege, and it's also an extraordinary responsibility. So when you look at that, and I'd just like to quote just generally on this particular topic, is that people remember how you made them feel. So let me also ask you another question. Think back to your own childhood, and can you remember a coach, a teacher, or a mentor who had a lasting influence in your life? And I'm sure most of us can, but I would like now to ask yourself this: what do you actually remember about them? Because was it, of course, now the tactical knowledge? Was it the favorite formation? And this again would come to football or team sport. Was it the number of trophies they won? Perhaps. But I suspect that for most of us, those are not the things that we remember the most. We remember something much more human. We remember how they treated us, whether they believed in us, whether they encouraged us after we made mistakes. Again, whether they challenged us with respect rather than humiliation, and whether they made us feel that we mattered. So, of course, put your answers in the chat again as I move along. But then long after athletes or even players forget individual matches and training sessions, they rarely forget the environment in which those experiences took place. So, of course, they will remember whether sport felt safe for them, whether it felt welcoming, whether it felt respectful, and whether it became a place they dreaded. Unfortunately, it could be the case for some or most. And that observation is where now sits at the very heart of safeguarding. So, of course, as you can see from the slide, you can see there's hope, there's opportunity, there's belonging, there's friendship, there's confidence, there's purpose. And people come to sport, of course, as I said earlier, for positive experiences. So, maybe, as we move along, I'm sure we might have some time to go through your responses, but just allow me to go forth so that we don't cut out from our knowledge session. And then when we look at it again, sadly, sport is not automatically safe. So one of the greatest misconceptions around safeguarding is the belief that it is simply another policy that organizations are expected to have sitting on the shelf. Because I would like to challenge that assumption from the outset. Because again, safeguarding is not fundamental about paperwork. It's about the culture. It's about the policy. Of course, again, I'm not denying that policies matter. It's always a good step. It's always a good, I would say, background or foundation to have. But they provide the structure. Policies provide the structure. They clarify also the responsibilities that stakeholders have. They also establish reporting procedures. But then again, policies do not keep people safe. And by what I mean by that is that culture often determines whether those policies are lived every single day. Because you can have an excellent safeguarding policy and still have an unsafe environment if leaders tolerate poor behavior. And equally, because I have visited, of course, community club with limited resources and simple governance structures, where every athlete could be, for example, treated with dignity, and every parent feels welcome, and every coach understands that respect is non-negotiable. And now those are the environments that are often safer because safeguarding is part of the culture rather than simply a part of documentation. And why I say this is because even in the current space that we're in, we can see that many sports organizations are currently focusing more on safeguarding. They're coming in, making policies, etc. But yet again, we still see scandals. We still see cases coming out where athletes are speaking about abuse. It could be abuse that has happened, for many years. Even on the international space, we still see racism. We still see cyberbullying online by players. We still see some sort of abuse, harassment, because again, safeguarding is very wide. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most extreme cases. It could also mean the small things that we may overlook that seem like just normal sportsmanship or sports banter. But then when you look at it on the foundation level, it's a safeguarding issue. So just a reflection, maybe exercise for just a minute before we move along is, I'd like you to think about that one coach again who influenced your life. And this is now drawing back to the question that I asked you earlier. Don't type anything in the chat just yet, but simply picture that person and ask yourself, what made them memorable? Because again, remember, I asked you, was it the tactical knowledge or was it the way they treated you? And hold on to that thought because I believe the answer lies at the heart of safeguarding. And of course, we can have a discussion later on. You can share more about that. But just as something I want you to sit on, just reflect on it and ask yourself, what made them memorable? Other than the football tactical knowledge, how, they trained you, etc., but how were you treated and how do you remember that treatment till today? And possibly even how it's affected you as a coach now. So, and I would like now to, and this is now just some of the, or rather, again, as I warned you earlier, I might speak faster than I move my slides. But again, the slides will be shared with you at the end of the session. So in case we move faster than anticipated, these are just some of the things that I was just pointing out. So let's now go to the root of the discussion today. I mean, for most of us, maybe not all of us have been exposed to this, and you might have maybe more knowledge than some of your participants today. You might have zero knowledge or maybe just an idea of what safeguarding is. But this is now going to the root of our discussion today. What is safeguarding? So what do we actually mean when you use the word safeguarding? Because for me, safeguarding can be understood in its simplest form as the deliberate creation of sporting environments where every participant is protected from harm and treated with dignity, respect, and fairness. So again, notice something important about that definition. I deliberately said every participant, not only children, not only athletes, not every participant involved in sport. It could be you, it could be you as a coach, it could be me as a sports lawyer, it could be the volunteer, it could be the referee, it could be the coach, the manager. Everyone involved in sport is a participant who has to be safeguarded. So safeguarding certainly includes children and young people. And we will spend considerable time discussing the additional protection later this evening, but it also includes adult athletes. And as I said earlier, it involves coaches, referees, volunteers, medical personnel, parents as well, officials of that sport. And every person has the right to participate in sport free from abuse, harassment, discrimination, and unnecessary harm. And that is what Safe Sport seeks to achieve. Of course, my definition might not be all encompassing in the sense that, of course, many organizations, many institutions might have different interpretation or different definition of what safeguarding is. But I think holistically, for me, this is what safeguarding should stand for. And of course, when you look at it, when you talk about sport is neither safe nor unsafe. And what do I mean by this is that perhaps the single most important message I would like for you to take away from this opening discussion is this. Sports itself is neither safe nor unsafe. People make sport safe, and people also make sport unsafe. And what do I mean by this is that the distinction now changes the entire conversation, because it reminds us that safeguarding is not the responsibility of one safeguarding officer or one federation policy. It is created every day through decisions that coaches make, the language we use, the standards we set, the behavior we tolerate, and ultimately the relationships we build. So every interaction contributes to culture. And this is now where I went back, where I said, yes, policies do matter, but it's the culture that actually defines whether safe or whether sport is safe. And because every decision, of course, creates culture, because safeguarding is not separate from coaching. It is one of the clearest expressions of good coaching. So when you look at it, and of course, if safeguarding is fundamentally about culture rather than compliance, as you can see here on the slide, is that then it raises an important question. Why do many organizations still approach safeguarding as though it were merely another policy requirement? And maybe just to answer that, we need to explore the difference between having a safeguarding policy and building a safeguarding culture. And that is what I would like us to look at next. So beyond compliance, we look at now building a culture of safe sport. So whilst policies alone are not enough, and as I said earlier, it's always a good starting point to have the policies in place, because it lays a foundation, it sort of lays a structure, and I would say a reference point where all stakeholders can go back to and refer to what exactly the organization or the federation stands for, or even the club or institution or any entity that, in this case, uses sport as the day-to-day. So one of I would say the greatest misconception again about safeguarding is that it is something organizations have. And this could be either as a safeguarding policy, it could be something that you claim in terms of a code of conduct. It could be a reporting procedure that of course could be now included in a code of conduct or safeguarding policy or framework. A certificate showing that coaches attended safeguarding training. Of course, again, I reiterate, while these things are all important, every organization should have them. They provide clarity. They also establish expectations and also help organizations, of course, respond consistently when concerns arise. But let me ask you a question. Have you ever worked in an organization that has excellent policies, yet people still behave badly, for the lack of a better word? And I know, or rather I suspect many of us have. And because, again, documents do not change the behavior of people. It's the people who change their own behaviors. And this is why, again, safeguarding cannot simply be measured by asking whether a policy exists. The most important question is, does the policy influence the way people behave every day? Because if the answer is no, then the safeguarding has become an exercise in compliance rather than a commitment to culture. I don't know if so far that is clear in terms of now differentiating compliance and culture. And of course, feel free to again put your questions in the Q&A. I'll be happy to tackle that after the session. But this is where I think the most important distinction is where we talk about compliance and culture. Because when you talk about compliance versus culture, often we explain the differences like this, because compliance on this side asks, do we have a safeguarding policy? As Chipongo asked earlier. Culture on the other end asks, do people actually feel safe here? Because compliance asks whether everyone has signed the code of conduct. And culture asks whether leaders consistently model it. Because you might have the excellent policy in place, but if a leader today still abuses, still humiliates, still harasses a player or any other staff or stakeholder working in that establishment, then we can already see that the culture is not there yet. Because we might have that policy on the shelf, but when it's not shaping the way we still interact with the people that will work around us. So compliance again would ask whether reporting mechanism exists. Culture on the other hand asks whether athletes trust enough to use it. You might have that a reporting mechanism in place where it goes through, rather in terms of structure, you have it going all the way through investigation and even issuing the sanction. But are the athletes, or in this case now, as we say, all stakeholders, they feel safe to submit reports to this mechanism in the sense that they're confident enough that this issue will be taken through confidently without re-traumatizing them, without further harassment and abuse, to a point that they now feel like, okay, this was handled well, and I received the sort of help and assistance that I, hoped, and at the end of the day ended up feeling safe, because in as much as the violation was done or something was done against me that was negative, a positive outcome came out of this. At the same time, cultures ask whether compliance is often again measured by paperwork, as I said earlier, the policy you have in place. But culture is measured by everyday behavior, because behavior is what athletes experience. And with every training session, every conversation, and every decision, this is why culture matters far more than people sometimes realize. Let's look at a case reflection, and this is something to put whatever we're discussing into more, I would say, perspective and understanding. So let me give you a simple example, and of course you can see just some of that on the slides. Imagine two football academies. We have Football Academy A, we have Football Academy B. The first academy, as we've said, has an outstanding safeguarding documentation. Football Academy A, as we've said, has an outstanding safeguarding documentation of policy. Every coach has attended safeguarding workshops or trainings. We have every volunteer having signed the code of conduct. And of course, on paper, as we said, everything looks impressive. Yet, during training, we see players are shouted at and publicly humiliated for making mistakes. Parents who ask difficult questions are labeled problematic. We have athletes are discouraged from reporting concerns because they fear losing playing time. And again, this is a very common issue that many athletes face all over the world, but prevalent in Africa. Winning, again, is celebrated, but speaking up is not. And on the other hand, now, we're imagining now this second academy. The facilities are very basic. The resources are limited. They don't have enough money in this case, or resources in the sense that they don't have the best, jerseys or the pizzazz that we want every club to have. But the safeguarding policy is only a few pages long, probably 10 pages. But then coaches know every player by name. We have parents are welcome as partners. We have athletes who know exactly who they can approach if something worries them. And then respect is expected regardless of age, gender, or ability. And mistakes, of course, are treated as opportunities to learn rather than reasons for embarrassment. And then now ask yourself honestly, which academy would you rather trust with your child? Because again, as I've already seen in some of the chat, most people is instinctively choose the second one. And again, you ask yourself why? Because safeguarding is not experienced through policies, as we said earlier. It is experienced through people. And of course, again, policies establish expectations, because we know these are the standards. Everyone can say our standards are exceptional. This is what we expect all our staff to uphold. This is what we expect all our coaches to uphold. But then, on the other hand, if the culture is not the same, then again, culture is what determines whether those expectations become reality. So again, a reflective session. Take 3 minutes. or rather, we'll take 3 minutes on this. I'd like you to answer that one question in the chat. Imagine you are a parent choosing between those two academies. Which one would you choose and why? In just one sentence, of course. Time moves faster than we expect, but maybe I'll just, or maybe Chipongo, you help me just read 2 or 3 answers. Which one would you choose and why?
Okay. So we have 4 responses, but no whys yet. Most of them are choosing Academy B. So guys, include why you are choosing Academy B, Paul. Why are you choosing Academy B, Uluwale and Izuchuku, as well as Victoria? We see, I will also choose Academy B because obviously I want where I will go to, and there's a coach that believes in my kid, not my kid coming home and crying and saying, oh, they are complaining about my skill and saying I don't have enough, and saying, and maybe there are some academies you go to, they're being compared to, they're not treated as an individual talent. They're being pushed back because the coach feels like they're not good enough and they cannot stay side by side with the others, So Oluwale is saying B because learning environment matters. Strategy without culture is pointless. That's nice. So more of your answers, please send in the chat. Why are you choosing Academy B? And if you're choosing Academy A, of which I will be surprised if anyone is choosing Academy A. Why are you choosing Academy A? So Kuti Damola says Academy B because of the respectful culture. BJ says Academy B because this creates, one moment, that was quick, it went so fast. Because this creates a safe space for kids to grow and understand the game while encouraging them to be better. Limited resources doesn't necessarily mean limited value provided. Nice. Academy B, Ugochukwu says Academy B because I want an academy where my child will be trained with good morals and excellent culture. Mathieu says Academy B would likely be the preferred choice. Even though it has fewer resources, it provides a respectful environment where players feel safe, valued, and comfortable speaking up. A positive culture and strong relationships are often more important for a child's development than having the best facilities or written policies. An academy can have excellent rules on paper, but if those rules are not reflected in everyday behavior, children may not feel safe and supported. Conversely, an academy with limited resources can still provide an excellent environment if it fosters respect, trust, and open communication. Olale says Academy B because environment shape destiny and behavior. Really nice answers, yeah.
Yeah, it's impressive and it gives me hope because so far no one has chosen Academy A, and of course, as you've noticed that in as much as it had better policy, you all chose Academy B because again you trusted its culture. So maybe let's speak more about that. So when you talk about culture, culture is one of the words we hear all the time. But what does it actually mean? For me, I think culture can be summed up in one simple question: is that how do we think? How do we do things around here? So the question is answered every single day. The way coaches correct mistakes, the way teammates speak to one another, the way referees are treated, the way parents are welcomed, the way concerns are handled, and the way leaders respond when something goes wrong. Because we've said culture is not created by mission statements, it is created by repeated behavior. And that is why I have used one phrase throughout this presentation, and I want it to stay with you after today, long after today, is that every decision creates culture. So as we've seen here, every conversation creates culture, every joke creates culture, every selection decision creates culture, every response to a concern creates culture, And every silence creates culture. And that question is never whether we are creating culture. The question is, what kind of culture are we creating? So when we talk about that now, we look at how, or rather, safe sport is a leadership responsibility, as we all know. But increasingly, this is how international sport approaches safeguarding. So we're already talking about, or rather earlier, Chibongo raised about the FIFA. Of course, as we sit right now, the International Olympic Committee describes safe sport as creating environments that are free from all forms of harassment and abuse. FIFA's safeguarding framework, on the other hand, goes even further by emphasizing that prevention, education, and organizational responsibility. Notice something important, neither begins with investigations, because it all roots itself to, or rather they begin with leadership. Because safeguarding is not something that starts after an incident, it starts long before one even occurs. And it starts when leaders now make decisions that place human well-being alongside performance. And we're talking about this not beneath it. And of course, the most successful organizations also understand that safeguarding and high performance are not competing objectives. In fact, they reinforce one another. So what I was saying is that the most successful organizations, of course, or rather understand or needs to understand that safeguarding and high performance are not competing objectives. In fact, they reinforce one another. And what do I mean by this? Athletes perform best when they feel psychologically safe. And when, of course, when they trust their coaches, and when they know mistakes will be corrected, not ridiculed. So when respect is consistent rather than conditional, safe environments, of course, now produce confident athletes, and confident athletes perform better. So we see now here how safeguarding, therefore, is not a barrier to excellence, it is one of the foundations of excellence. So when you look at this, and just again, another reflection point for us, and before we move on, I'd like us to pause for a moment and then now think about your own team, not your safeguarding policy, not your club's website, your team. If I spent 1 week, for example, observing your training sessions without reading a single document, what would I learn about your culture? And it's important here because I'd like to maybe point some examples. Would I see encouragement or fear? Would I see respect or intimidation? Would I again see inclusion or favoritism? Would I see athletes who are confident enough to ask questions, or athletes who remain silent because they fear the consequences? And at the same time, or ultimately, culture is not what organizations say, is what they believe. So, as we've said earlier, culture is what people experience. And that experience is shaped, again, every single day by the decisions we make as leaders. So again, sit with that. Encouragement or fear, respect or intimidation, inclusion or favoritism. And again, of course, are your athletes confident enough to ask questions? And then at the same time, athletes, of course, remain silent because they fear consequences. And this is now, again, we'll go back to the culture that you build in your organization. So just to transition to the next part, and this is the next slide, or the next part that we're going to, is we're going to talk about responsibility of trust. If safeguarding is about creating safe environments for everyone, who do we devote, or rather, why do we devote so much attention to children and young people? And the answer is not because children are more important than adults, because again, as we raised earlier, safeguarding is for everyone, not just young people. But again, when you talk about it is because, again, responsibility entrusted to adults becomes significantly greater whenever children are placed in our care. So to understand safeguarding fully, we must first, again, understand the responsibility that comes with trust. And this is when we'll turn to now. We talk about the responsibility of trust while children require additional protection. So up to this point, we've spoken about safeguarding as something that benefits everyone in sport. I think we've also agreed that every participant, whether it's an athlete, whether it's a coach or referee, volunteer or parent, has the right to participate in an environment that is safe, respectful, and free from harm. So now let me ask a question. If safeguarding applies to everyone, Why does so much of our attention now focus on children and young people? And for me, my answer is not because children are more important than adults. Every person's dignity has equal value. But the answer is because children require greater protection and adults now carry that greater responsibility. Therefore, that distinction now changes everything because we're now talking about safeguarding is not based on the idea that children are incapable. It is based on the recognition that they're still developing. And I think this is some of the comments that were put in the chat when you're talking about Academy A and B. Children, again, we're talking about children who are still developing physically, they're developing emotionally, they're developing psychologically, socially. They are learning who they are. They're learning how to build relationships, and they're also learning how to recognize appropriate behavior. And perhaps most importantly, they're still learning how to challenge authority. And that is why adults now must exercise greater care whenever children are entrusted to them. So when you talk about now the trust, of course, now being the foundation of coaching, think about parents, or rather what parents actually do when they bring a child to training. They hand the child over to you as a coach, and of course, depending on your schedule, depending on your criteria, sometimes 2 evenings every week, sometimes every weekend, sometimes even during away trips or tournaments or even residential camps. And in that moment, something incredibly important happens. They place their trust in you, not simply to improve the football skills, but to protect the well-being of someone they love and care for. So again, few professions actually receive that level of trust because parents trust you with their children's confidence. They also trust you with their self-esteem, their aspirations, sometimes even their future. Because again, now this is where you see it's an extraordinary privilege because the question is not whether coaches have influence. The question is how that influence is used. So the problem is not about, or rather not questioning whether you have the capability. We've already established the fact that you are the coach. You're deemed to be the one who should be, maybe again, not to avoid the expert, but the specialist who's meant to train the child. But it's something that is holistic in the sense that you're not just training them in terms of what they do on the pitch, but you're molding them as players, you're molding them as future adults, you're molding them as a team member for everyone, you're molding them as a child to their parent, and what you teach them or the culture that they experience with you on those training sessions is what they will end up carrying probably for the rest of their lives. So when you now look at there's a word that comes very often when it comes to safeguarding, and we talk about power. Power is not really a problem. I think for me, I always believe that it's the misuse of power that is the issue. Because again, as I said, one word often appears in safeguarding discussions: power. And what comes with power is the authority behind it. So unfortunately, I think people sometimes misunderstand it. Power is not automatically negative because, in fact, I think coaching depends upon it. Athletes expect coaches to know more than they do. They expect your guidance, they expect your direction, your feedback, discipline. And now authority itself, on the other hand, is also not the problem. The problem arises when the authority becomes an entitlement. And this is, I think, where now the profound difference comes in. And as you can see on the slide, I've just put some differences there, but I'll maybe just explain a bit more. Authority exists to serve those we lead. And now this is where, as a leader, as a coach, you come in as an authority figure. And then on the other hand, we talk about entitlement existing where you serve yourself. So great coaches understand that influence is something they borrow, not something you own. And every coaching decision should answer one question: is this decision serving the athlete or is it serving me? And I think that single question has the power to transform coaching practice. Are you serving others? Are you building trust? Are you encouraging growth? Are you accepting accountability? On the other side of entitlement, you're serving yourself. How do I sort of maybe make myself the best coach out there? How do I produce, say, the best athlete who probably get signed, in big clubs internationally, so that I can have my name out there and say, oh, this player came from this coach, etc. Do you demand obedience, or do you build trust where your authority is given by the athlete and not something you, I would say, demand from, again, for the lack of a better word, demand from the athletes by saying, I'm the coach, you should respect me, you should obey me? Or does it come automatically by the trust you build and the respect you build with the players? Are you encouraging growth, or are you exercising control? And at the same time, when something bad happens, are you accepting the accountability of it, or do you avoid the accountability? So those are some of the things that I would say should sit with you as a coach. Are you serving yourself, or are you serving someone else? And this is when the difference comes in between the authority with the power you've been entrusted, or is it an entitlement issue? Because again, I'd like you to think about the one child that you currently coach, not your most talented player, of course, not your captain, simply just one child, and now ask yourself 3 questions. If they had a problem tomorrow, would they know they could come to you as a coach? Would they believe that you would listen to them? And would they now leave that conversation feeling safer than when they arrived? And of course, you don't need to answer those questions publicly. Again, there's an anonymous option there. But these are the questions each of us as leaders should ask ourselves. If they had a problem tomorrow, would they know they can come to you? Would they believe that you would listen to them? And when you listen to them, would they leave that conversation feeling safer than when they arrived? And now, let's, as we build up on this conversation, let's now look at the children's rights in sport. So again, this understanding is reflected not only in good coaching practice, but also in international law. So of course, we know the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child recognizes that every child has the right to protection from all forms of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation, while also recognizing their right to play, participate, and develop in environments that promote their well-being. So of course, when you look closer to home, we have the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which also reinforces those same principles while recognizing the unique realities affecting children across the African continent. So neither document was written specifically for sport, yet both have fundamentally shaped how sports understand its responsibilities. So together, they remind us of a simple but powerful principle. Children should never have to choose between pursuing their sporting dream and being safe, because safety is not a reward for participation, it is a right. And that means, again, now safeguarding is no longer simply a matter of good practice, it is a part of respecting children's rights. So when you talk about that, I would just like to use a case. I don't know if any of you, or maybe you know of it or you've heard of it, but of course, I might just give a brief overview, just generally what's it about or what the message you're trying to build on is, and just feel free to look it up at your own time. It's a very popular case, so I'm sure you'll find enough information out there on this. But let me illustrate why this matters through one of the football's most significant safeguarding cases. So for many years, Barry Bennell was regarded as a respected youth football coach in England. He was trusted by clubs, he was trusted by parents, he was trusted by the young players who believed he could help them achieve their dreams of becoming professional footballers. And of course, that trust became the very mechanism through which that abuse occurred. Because when looking back, investigators found that the greatest failure was not simply one individual, in this case the coach, but it was an environment where questions were not asked early enough. And this is where now boundaries became blurred, where trust existed without sufficient accountability. And the lesson from the Bennell case is that coaches should be viewed, or rather, that coaches should be viewed with suspicion. Is the overwhelming majority of coaches who make an extraordinary contribution to young people's lives. So the lesson primarily this, that trust should never exist without transparency. Of course, professional boundaries protect children. They also protect the coaches because, and this is why safeguarding is never about limiting positive relationships. It is about ensuring that those relationships still remain healthy, professional, and worthy of the trust placed in them. So again, we're not saying that safeguarding should come in where now coaches are viewed as the villains, where people should be wary of them. But it's just understanding that yes, you might have a good relationship with your player, and in this case, a minor. But then are there boundaries in place where should those boundaries be crossed, the right questions are asked and investigation is done, or someone now raises a question like, why is this happening? And again, at the same time, these are boundaries that are also there to protect you as coaches, where now no one starts probably suspecting you of bad behavior. So again, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with a child, when you're dealing with even with an adult, in every setting, you have to have some professionalism. There's also the trust that is built with you, so that the boundaries that are placed there are to ensure that that trust is not broken. And but of course, when it's broken, now this is where now some of the safeguarding issues might arise, and where it creates risk and raises questions. So when you just reflect again now, before we move on, and I like again to think about one child in your team, that same child that we had earlier in our reflection, or rather reflection scenario before we got to this stage, not your best player, not your most talented player, just that one child, anyone from your team. And now again, ask yourself 3 questions. If that child had a problem tomorrow, that same question that I asked you, would they know they could come to you? And again, that same question that I asked, would they believe that you would listen to them? And would they leave that conversation feeling safer than when they arrived? And just to say, these are not safeguarding questions. These are just simply leadership questions, because safeguarding is not something we do in addition to coaching. It is what good coaching looks like. And when athletes trust their coach, they communicate more openly. And when they feel respected, they develop that confidence. And when they now feel psychologically safe, they are more willing to learn, they test risks, and they grow. So again, we see how safe environments do not weaken performance, they strengthen it. Because if a player today feels like maybe a tactical session, or maybe some or I don't want to say orders, but just some coaching mechanism that you've introduced to them doesn't necessarily feel good in terms of physically for them, psychologically for them. Maybe it's too straining, maybe it's not something they enjoy. They can be able to freely come and communicate to you that, coach, I understand that you're the coach, you know better than us. You're here to guide us, you're here to make us best we can be out there. But this is my understanding, this is not something that maybe feels comfortable for me, or I feel like maybe we could improve it in such a manner. And at least it can be a conversation where now it doesn't become like, oh, I'm the coach, I tell you what to do. Rather than a conversation where, okay, I hear you and understand. My reasoning for maybe putting you through this coaching drill or exercise is because of this and this and that, but I'll take your point into consideration, and maybe we can change it up to suit maybe, or rather just customize it to something that now encompasses your understanding of it. And of course, it might work, might not work, but at least the player lives there and say, okay, coach had me, my thoughts were relevant. He understood my understanding or my feelings towards this. And he feels coming out there confident enough that, you know what, this is not just an environment where you back orders and they just follow, but at least it's something where all of us are participants and all of us are sort of part of the same community. And of course, when you look at that holistically, is where now you build confidence in your players, in the sense that they also take risks and they're also willing to grow. And of course, in the long run, you see also their performance becomes better. Yeah, because again, also as a team, You can feel that there would also be that cohesion even between him and the players, so they don't feel like they're secluded, or that just because they're not the best player again in the team, their thoughts are not relevant or listened to. So again, and just to transition now to our next part, is that while understanding why children now require additional protection naturally leads us to another important question, is that if trust is so essential to safeguarding, how do we recognize when that trust is beginning to break down? Because contrary to popular belief, of course, abuse rarely begins with a dramatic incident. We don't just hear about a coach having maybe violently abused a player, or when by the time a player maybe speaks about mental abuse, not just something that happened one time. In most cases, you always hear that this is something that probably happened years on end, and by the time scandals come out, most often than not, is huge numbers. You hear hundreds of players have been abused, and this happened over a 20-year period. And the question always asks, like, why didn't that first player talk about it or come out to speak about it? Or why didn't this come out in the first or second year? It's coming out 20 years later, where we're already having like tens and hundreds of victims. Because more often it begins quietly. And by beginning quietly, we're talking about that blood boundary, where a coach maybe, again, to use a physical example, a coach maybe spunked a player and you just viewed as a joke. Oh, it's okay. That's just how football is. It's just how coaches interact with their players. We already see that boundary has been crossed, and no one did anything about it. The player didn't speak out. The coach didn't see any problem with it. The teammate who saw thought it was just something normal, or even other leaders or people in the technical bench or referees or coaches just thought, it's okay, just how sports is and just how it's done. It's a dismissed concern. Maybe someone spoke about it, just like you brush it off. It's just sportsmanship. That's how people interact with each other in sport. It could be a joke that goes too far. It could be a teammate, because again, safeguarding issues or safeguarding risks do not necessarily, again, come from authority figures. It could be a teammate. It could be someone you train with. It doesn't necessarily have to be between coach and player, but we're using coach and player example here because we're talking to coaches. And we're talking about a behavior that gradually becomes normal. Because again, recognizing those early warnings or other warning signs may be one of the most important or safeguarding skills any coach can develop. And that is where now I'd like us to move next. So I'll give another case scenario. And again, maybe we can take 5 minutes to just ponder on this one. So let's walk through a practical situation together. Imagine you're coaching an under 15 football team, and one of your players has always been energetic and engaged. But over the last 3 weeks, however, you've noticed that they've become unusually quiet. For example, they arrive late to sessions, they avoid teammates, their performance has declined. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. There are no obvious injuries. The player is okay, seems to be playing well, just not performing at the level that they always do. And something feels different. And here's my question to you. What would you do first? And of course, now this is where I just allow you to type the answer in the question. There isn't necessarily one perfect answer, but there are certainly better places to begin. So you've noticed this from one of your players. What would you do first as a coach? You've noticed they're unusually quiet. This player is probably the most vibrant in your team, always joking, always encouraging other teammates, always there early on the training sessions, always looking forward to playing and all that. But you're now noticing them, they're unusually quiet, they're arriving late to sessions, they don't have the same enthusiastic or passion that they used to before, they're avoiding teammates, and of course now the performance is not as before. Again, nothing dramatic has happened. No one has, say, for example, physically abused them. It's not something that you see again visibly seen, but you've noticed something is different. What would you do as a coach?
Coaches, we're looking for your answers in the chat. What would you do as a coach when one of your athletes who is usually very active, all of a sudden becomes so quiet? What is the first thing you will do as a coach? Let's see your answers in the chat. So there is this one. Let me see. Okay, this is a question. Guys, put your answers in the chat. Ugochukwu says, call for a private meeting and ask what's going on. And before asking, making him or her comfortable around me. And Oluwale says, have a private section with him or her to know what the person is. Well, I think I mixed something there, but yeah, to know what the problem is, I guess, with the athlete. And yeah, Destiny says, I will have a private discussion with him or her to find out what the problem is. Personal issues, okay. Have a private session with him or her. This is Oluwale. He says, have a private session with him or her to know what the personal issues is with the athlete. Okay, keep your answers coming through. What would you do when you notice that kind of switch, that change in that athlete? Someone who is very vibrant, normally speaks with their colleagues, with their fellow athletes, and all of a sudden the person comes to training so quiet, not talking to anyone, just on their own most of the time. Their performance begins to drop, Father Yomi says, I will definitely give her or him a room for free expression. Let him or her know she's free to talk with me. I just have to be a psychology coach as at that moment, or therapist. Okay, interesting. Angel says, observe the change. Speak to the player privately with care. Listen without judgment and report any safeguarding concerns through the proper channels. Keep your answers coming through, Khayran?
Yeah. I think, of course, just from the responses that you're putting on, most of you are saying, having a chat, ask them what's going on. And this is where now I would like to point, or rather explain just briefly on observation, professional curiosity, and early intervention. So, of course, in this particular regard, we're talking about youth sports, where observation, professional curiosity, and early intervention are critical to dismantling now the culture of compliance that often shields abuses. Because, as I say, I've already, established that sports environments are uniquely vulnerable because coaches hold immense authority. Minor athletes are highly driven, of course, to please because they want to be seen as the best player. They want to be chosen as either become the captain or be chosen in the team whenever they play. And performance pressures, of course, frequently make emotional, physical distress. And this is now, I think, these are the three concepts applied directly safeguarding minors in sports because observation. The sporting signs in sports context, because of course, signs of abuse or neglect often manifest through training behaviors, physical changes, and even the changing relationship dynamics with coaches or peers. So again, as we've said earlier on, performance and training changes, maybe sudden unexplained drops in athletic performance or loss of interest in the sport or football in this case, or an obsessive maybe fixation of perfection. Suddenly you see them, they want to be the best, pushing themselves much more than before. It could be physical indicators where frequent injuries blamed on clumsiness or hidden bruising, maybe wearing long sleeve, for example, where they never used to wear they used to be more free in wearing shorts and long sleeves, or even it could be even extreme weight loss or even severe exhaustion. It could be, again, behavioral shifts. We're talking about extreme anxiety around specific coaches, fear of making mistakes, or even hyper competitiveness, or even withdrawal from the team, socialization, as we've said earlier. They could be avoiding their teammates, and even again, observation could be now boundaries and grooming signs, because a coach giving maybe a specific child specific treatment, or even excessive, again, private communication, texting or social media, or giving expensive personal gifts. These are some of the things that you can observe and see as an early warning sign as to now safeguarding issues. And then it comes to now the professional curiosity, where you challenge the no pain, no gain mentality, for example. And professional curiosity now in sports means looking past typical athletic excuses. Of course, now this requires peers, it requires parents, and even officials to question whether a child's behavior is driven by healthy motivation or fear and coercion. And this is now where you question standards, or rather questioning standards. Excuses do not simply accept that a child is just tired from training, for example, or highly disciplined. You ask, why are they reluctant to go home, for example, or why they panic when they make an error. And then, of course, now investigating overtraining could be now challenging a culture where minors train through severe injuries, because and I've seen this, and maybe I hope maybe you as coaches also don't do this, is where sometimes players are told, you got hurt, just play through the pain, you need to persevere. And in most cases, it happens when you're dealing with male players. You're told, oh, we're men, we're built to withstand pain, so you play through the pain. And I've had this even in coaching sessions, and even post playing, or rather post-game remarks by coaches telling players, you need to man up and just play through the pain, just a small injury. And these are some of the things that, stand out as, of course, could be things we've been conditioned to perceive as normal, but they are safeguarding risk and problems that, of course, have manifested over time. And maybe sometimes looking past the charm, because child abusers in sports are often highly successful, charismatic coaches who have won trophies, and they curiously evaluate their boundary lines, of course, regardless of their win-loss record. And then, of course, also monitoring digital spaces, especially now where social media, or every child literally has a phone these days. Safely investigate why, for example, a coach is in a private WhatsApp group or Discord server with a minor athlete without the parents present, or even parents being aware of the communication. And some of the early interventions that you can take, for example, breaking the cycle of abuse, is that youth sports, of course, prevent now minors boundary crossing from escalating now into severe physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. So enforcing the rule of two protocol. Again, ensure a minor athlete is never alone with a single adult. So for all of you who are saying professional, rather call them privately and ask them a question, and make them, these are some of the things that, again, you can now start looking into as a safeguarding issue. The rule of two protocol. Ensure a minor athlete is never alone with a single adult coach, for example, in a locked room, a vehicle, or a hotel room. Intervene immediately if this rule is broken, for example. Disrupting for toxic power dynamics, so address screaming or public humiliation, or even weight shaming by coaches before it becomes accepted as a team culture. And even, you can even create like low barrier reporting pathways. You give young athletes anonymous, trusted ways to report concerns without fear of being, again, kicked off the team or losing play time. And of course, again, depending on the organization, how much resources you might have or capability in if a minor, for example, hints at abuse, sports clubs must bypass internal investigation and immediately report the issue to Child Protective Services or bodies that are mandated to protection of minors. So, of course, given different jurisdictions, what are the regulations that are in place when it comes to the protection of minors against abuse. So these are some of the things that you can put into place. And of course, it doesn't cost you much. It's just about understanding. It's just about, putting I would say, the steps in place where we avoid those 20 years down the line, hundreds of victims suddenly speaking out because someone decided now this is enough for me, and then you hear, oh, me too, and this is now where the me too movement comes in. It's always one person breaking that cycle, and then suddenly many others are speaking out, and the question is always, why did why was it allowed to get this far, or did no one ever speak out? And you always find out that it's not that no one really didn't speak out or no one noticed before, because in most of these scandals you always hear that someone told someone, someone reported at some point, no action was taken, or it was just brushed off, or the leaders just said, oh, you know what, we cannot allow this to come out because again it become reputational damage to our club. So now you're putting the club's interest ahead of the player, or even the stakeholders who've been harmed in that scenario. So again, these are just something to ponder on, always something to reflect on as you move along in your coaching careers. So again, we're still talking about recognizing harm and seeing what others miss. So up to this point, we have explored why safeguarding matters. We've talked about why culture matters and why children require additional protection. We have spoken about trust, responsibility, and the leadership. But safeguarding ultimately becomes real in ordinary moments. So it becomes real when a coach now notices that something isn't quite right. We've already talked about this briefly now, recognizing the warning signs. And the question therefore is not simply, what is abuse? The better question should be, would I recognize the warning signs before harm becomes serious? Because one of the biggest misconceptions again about safeguarding is the belief that abuse always announces itself dramatically. It rarely does, because more often it develops quietly, as we've pointed this out earlier, gradually, almost unnoticed, because safeguarding failures are rarely the result of a single catastrophic event. They are usually the result of many smaller moments that were ignored, normalized, or dismissed. That is why one of the greatest safeguarding skills any coach can develop is not the investigation, is actually observation. So harm rarely begins with a crisis. We've already established this. Think about it in this way. Imagine driving a car, and imagine the engine light warning, or rather the engine light comes on. Nothing has broken yet. Your car is still moving. Everything sounds fine. It's not making any weird noises. Nothing dramatic yet. But the warning light has come on your car. Nothing has broken yet, of course. We've said the car is still moving. You could ignore it and continue driving, as most people often do. Or you could recognize that warning signs exist for a reason. Because again, and this is why now safeguarding works in much the same way, because very few situations begin with a criminal behavior. Most begin with, again, the boundaries becoming blurred, communication becoming inappropriate, behavior changing, concerns now being dismissed should anyone decide to speak out, people becoming silent, and now those small warning signs become bigger problems when nobody pays attention. And then the earlier we recognize them, of course, the easier they are to address. And that is why now, again, safeguarding is fundamentally about prevention rather than reaction. So maybe you're asking yourself, what does harm look like? And when people, of course, hear the word harm, they often immediately think of physical injury. Certainly, of course, physical abuse is one of the forms of harm. Again, forms of harm in safeguarding in sport are quite a few. But in sport, again, harm can take many different forms. An athlete, for example, may be repeatedly humiliated in front of teammates until they begin losing confidence. Could be talking about a child may feel pressure to compete while injured because, again, they fear disappointing the coach. A referee may experience racist abuse from spectators. Again, these are some of the things that might be overlooked when you're talking about safeguarding. A volunteer, again, may be sexually harassed by another member of staff. We even have, for example, a young athlete with a disability may be excluded because nobody considered how to make participation accessible. You could have an athlete who may be isolated, manipulated, or made to feel that selection depends upon unquestioning loyalty rather than effort and ability. And of course, none of these situations look identical, yet all of them undermine the dignity of the person of interest. And safeguarding, of course, now begins whenever dignity is compromised. So when you look at now a case scenario, so let's walk through a practical situation together. And or rather, this is the same one that I pointed out earlier, where you're now talking about that under 15 football team, and of course, one of the players, of course, drawing back to that same example, what could be some of the, for example, how would you point out that the dignity is compromised? Could it be maybe continuously you've noticed they've been humiliated during a training session or match, where whatever move they make, you hear the coach always shouting at them, calling them names, and just now generally just humiliating behavior around them? Or could you maybe notice, as you pointed the various examples before, the coach and the player always having some private time where either they're being shouted at, or you sort of notice something that is inappropriate according to you or anyone reasonably enough. You could even notice maybe even the teammates themselves behaving some type of way towards the player. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be coach-player relationship. It could be between their peers. How do the other teammates behave towards this player or towards other players? Especially, for example, we noticed this when we have this sort of the stars of the team, or stars of the club, where now they sort of develop this sort of I would say ego or leadership mentality, where now it crosses boundaries, where they feel like they're the exception to the rule, and they end up now treating other teammates in a certain way, because they believe that regardless of what they do, because they're the best players in the team, they will get away with it. So these are some of the examples that could be part of what you could observe. So let's, I know time is moving fast, so I'll try just move a bit faster, but just stop me if I'm going too fast, but I just want to cover as much of the content that I'd set out for today. So when we talk about high performance and harm, so again, let me raise a question that often generates discussion. Can a coach be demanding and still be safeguarding focused? And just for me, I think the answer is absolutely yes. Because again, best coaches expect excellence. They, of course, you establish high standards. As coaches, you establish high standards. This is what we expect from you as players, because this is what you want to achieve. You have your goals, you have your objectives. The challenge, of course, you challenge athletes to improve. And of course, you also encourage discipline, resilience, and accountability. And of course, none of these things are inconsistent with safeguarding. The problem often arises when we confuse high expectation with harmful behavior. So there's a significant difference between now correcting performance and attacking a person's worth. And of course, correcting performance develops confidence, while the other one destroys it. Because when you start attacking someone's worth, you destroy the confidence that they built, for them to be able to want to play, or rather just want to grow and develop themselves. So think about the language we use, or rather the language you use. Instead of saying you're useless, a coach committed to development might say, that wasn't your best decision, but let's look at how we can improve it. Of course, the standard still remains high. You're still pointing out that the player did not perform to the expectation that you put towards them, or rather the best criteria that they could have, or maybe even just the standard that you know them to be able to perform. But instead of now calling them useless or starting shouting at them and calling them names, you recognize that yes, that wasn't the best they could have done, but you're also recognizing, or rather putting it out to them, that okay, how can we improve that? What was the issue? Or rather just sort of recognizing what the problem was and try to tackle that problem with them, and seeing how you can improve that performance in the next maybe session or match. So again, the standards still remain high, the person's dignity remains intact, and good coaching, again, should stretch athletes, but they should never diminish them. So when you look at now another case scenario, where, for example, now silence becomes normal. So one of the recurring findings from major safeguarding reviews around the world is that harmful cultures are often characterized by silence. Not because people never notice problems, as we said earlier, but because they stop questioning them. You may hear comments such as that, for example, just that how coach is, or it's only banter. We've always done it this way, and I think this is the most common one. And of course, the other one would be if you want to succeed, you need to toughen up. And of course, these statements should make us pause, and not because every demanding coach is abusive. We've already established that high standards are okay, but because they become excuses for behavior that would never be accepted in any other environment. For example, the moment inappropriate behavior becomes normal, this is when our safeguarding begins to weaken, because healthy cultures encourage questions and safe cultures discourage them, because you're now told you should never speak out, you should never ask the question, you should never challenge someone, in this case of authority, you just go with what they say. As coaches, you should never fear being questioned, because again, transparency is what strengthens the trust that you have with your players. And I'd like to now go to of course, one of the most high-profile cases in safeguarding. And of course, perhaps no case illustrates this more clearly than the Larry Nassar scandal. Of course, when people first heard about the case, and we're talking about here over more than 200 victims, and of course the abuse spanning 20 years, this is a very long time. Medical doctor abused the athletes. In this case, it was gymnastics US. So when people first heard about the case, many assumed the primary failure was one individual. In this case, now Larry Nassar was the medical doctor. Subsequent investigations, of course, revealed something much more disturbing: is that athletes had spoken out. Parents themselves had also raised concerns about this, the behavior of this medical doctor, of the things, or rather how he was conducting some of this examination of the athletes. And questions had been asked, but those concerns were repeatedly minimized, dismissed, or ignored. And the greatest lesson, of course, from the Nassar case is not simply that abuse occurred, it's that the organizations missed repeated opportunities to intervene. Because that lesson again changed safeguarding around the world, because today we ask different questions, not simply how did this happen, but the question was more now about what warning signs did we overlook. So we go back to what we had raised earlier, those warning signs, how to recognize, observe, early intervention, and professional observation. So again, here, this is where now for coaches, this is a powerful reminder that safeguarding is really that one dramatic decision. It is about paying attention to the small things before they become major ones. So when you talk about now looking at the coach's safeguarding mindset, what should a safeguarding or focused coaching or coach do? And I would suggest 5 simple habits. So maybe just pay attention a bit here. Be present, and by this you notice the changes in behavior. You listen carefully when a player or an athlete decides to come and speak to you, and you ask respectful questions, because sometimes you find when victims decide to speak out, most of the time how we ask them questions normally sort of put them in a position where they are being questioned as to why they let something like that happen to them, rather than question why it happened to them in the first place. Again, never ignore something simply because it feels uncomfortable. So they could be reporting something about your maybe assistant coach, or even the head assistant coach, in this case the head coach, where you feel uncomfortable enough in saying, oh, I should not intervene into something like this. It's not my problem, for example. And you do not need to have all the answers. It's just, and of course, again, as I point out, you're not expected to investigate, but you should be professionally curious. If something doesn't feel right, do not dismiss it simply because you cannot immediately explain it. One conversation today might prevent significant harm tomorrow, and that again is now the power of early intervention. So just again, looking at just having that coaching safeguarding mindset. I've put those five pointers down the slide. Notice changes, listen carefully, act professionally, never ignore concerns, and always protect the dignity. So again, before we move on, I just again like to leave you with one question. At the end of every training session, ask yourself, did every athlete leave today's session with their dignity intact? And moving away from the question we normally ask, instead of did we win, did we complete the session plan? Of course, again, I reiterate, those things matter, but safeguarding us something more fundamental. Did every participant leave feeling respected, valued, and safe? And of course, if the answer is consistently yes, that you're already creating the kind of culture where safeguarding becomes part of everyday coaching rather than something that only appears when things go wrong. So again, remember, safeguarding should be more about prevention rather than reaction. We prevent harm from happening, but we're also recognizing that harm is inevitable to happen, and when it does, how do we react to it and how do we respond to it? But the fundamental or the foundation level should always be how do we prevent harm from happening? So recognizing concerns is only half of the safeguarding journey. The next challenge is knowing what to do when someone chooses you as the person they trust. Because there may come a day when an athlete quietly says, "Coach, can I talk to you?" And in that moment, your response may become one of the most important coaching decisions you ever make. And that now leads us to the next discussion. So, and this is when we're talking about when someone chooses you, how do you respond to the concerns? And for me, I would say with confidence, compassion, and professionalism. So throughout today's discussion, we've talked about safeguarding as a culture. We have explored trust, we've looked about responsibility and the importance of recognizing the early signs of harm before they become crisis. But there's one important moment that every coach hopes never comes, and yet every coach must be prepared for. And it is the moment when an athlete quietly asks, "Coach, can I talk to you?" So those four words carry enormous significance. And in that moment, again, football is no longer the priority because, and again, here, winning is no longer the priority, selection is no longer the priority. A person has chosen you as someone they trust. And the trust, as we discussed throughout this session, always now brings the responsibility. Because one conversation handled well can become the beginning of protection, healing, and support. And the same conversation handled badly can reinforce fear, silence, and isolation. And that is why every coach, regardless of experience, should know how to respond. But most importantly, I would like to also reiterate on this because speaking up is also almost always difficult for a victim or even a whistleblower, because again, we also have to understand that people who come to speak to you are not always the direct victim of abuse. It could be a player who had or a teammate decide to speak to them, and they are now deciding to be the ones to now come and speak about. So it could be a third party. It could be the first, I would say, victim in this place. And we always need to understand that speaking out is always difficult. So by the time someone decides to come and speak to you, they've really thought this through and just maybe weighed all options, and it's usually a very heavy burden on them. So before we discuss what to do, I think it's important to also understand why speaking up is often so difficult. And one of the most common questions people ask after safeguarding failures is, why didn't they tell someone? And of course, it sounds like a reasonable question, but it is often the wrong question. Because the better question is, what made it so difficult to speak? Because children may fear getting into trouble. They may worry that they will not be believed. And again, I also reiterate on this point, it's not always children who have the fear or the fear of speaking out. Even adults fear speaking out. And again, the worry is also that most victims fear they're not going to be believed. And it's just because, unfortunately, most of the time, victims are not believed when they speak out. They may feel embarrassed or ashamed because, again, most of the time victims blame themselves, and hence why they're embarrassed or ashamed to speak out, because they always ask themselves, why did this happen to me? Or why did that person, for example, choose me as their victim and not someone else? Why me? It's always a question of why me. So they always feel embarrassed and ashamed as to why that bad or harm happened to them. And they may have been manipulated, for example, into believing what happened was somehow their fault. All the athletes, again, may fear losing their place in the team. It could be a scholarship, it could be a contract, or the opportunity they have worked towards for years. Others remain silent because they have watched what happened when someone else raised a concern. So they've seen someone else, face negative repercussions for speaking out, and they decide, you know what, let me just speak out, keep silent. Let me just focus on my sport, make sure that I'm selected for this team, make sure that I get this contract, make sure that I get this scholarship. Because again, they saw that nothing changed. Perhaps they were ignored, perhaps they were labeled as difficult, perhaps the person they reported to was protected because they were successful. And when that happens again, silence becomes a survival strategy. And that is why creating a culture where people feel safe to speak is just as important as knowing how to respond once they do. So your first response, of course, matters. Again, imagine the situation. Training has finished, everyone else has gone home, and a player waits behind and says, "Coach, I need to tell you something." So take a moment, pause before you respond, and think about what that athlete may have gone through before speaking to you. And perhaps they rehearsed that conversation dozens of times. Perhaps they nearly spoke yesterday, but they lost their confidence. And perhaps they even spent weeks wondering whether anyone would believe them. So again, this is why I say your first response matters, not because you're expected to solve everything immediately, but because your response determines whether they feel safe enough to continue. And the first words you speak should communicate three things. 1, I believe you. 2, I am listening. And 3, you are not alone. And sometimes, again, the simplest words are the most powerful. It could be just telling them, thank you for telling me this. I'm glad you spoke to me about this. You have done the right thing to come to me. Of course, also, going back to how they possibly feel about what happened to them and telling them, I'm sorry this has happened. And of course, now also ensuring them that we will make sure you get the support you need. Those statements communicate safety because they communicate belief. You believe them, you reassured them, you thank them for speaking out, you told them it's good that they came to speak to you about it and that have done the right thing. And of course, now, most importantly, it also communicates hope. So again, we've talked about your first response matters. They have come to you, they've now told you everything. Of course, listen first, investigate later. And one of the biggest, again, misconception among coaches is that they need to investigate. You don't need to investigate. Your responsibility is not to establish whether the abuse has occurred. Your responsibility to respond appropriately to the information you have received. That means, again, listening carefully. You remain calm when the player is speaking to you. Allow the individual to speak at their own pace. Don't ask them questions. Don't interrupt them. Don't sort of add onto things or suddenly you say, oh, I noticed this about this coach. I always knew he was like this. Don't do that. Just let them speak without adding salt to the food. And of course, avoiding leading questions. And of course, also avoiding judgment. Instead of asking a player, oh, why were you alone with the coach? You know you're not supposed to be alone with an adult. These are some of the judgment that will make that person now stop speaking to you and feel like, oh, maybe I did something wrong. I shouldn't have spoken out. Sounds like it's my fault at the end of the day, not the other person who actually did something wrong to me. And of course, again, avoid promises you cannot keep. One promise in particular should never be made is never say, I promise I won't tell anyone. Because although that promise may come from kindness, it looks like you're protecting that someone's anonymity or confidentiality, but it might also prevent you from taking the steps necessary to protect that individual. Because instead, just be honest. And you might say, thank you for trusting me. I may need to share this with the appropriate people so that we can help keep you safe, but I will only tell those who need to know. And I think that's where that response protects both trust and safeguarding, because you almost always have to acknowledge that you're not the person who will now again investigate or give the appropriate measure once this thing has been proved, or give the sanction that is available. Because in every organization, or my hope is that almost all organizations usually have internal disciplinary matters, and this is where now other individuals come in. So instead of saying, I promise not to tell anyone, you say, thank you for trusting me. I may need to share this with the appropriate people so that we can help keep you safe, but I will only tell those who need to know. So again, I will go to a scenario discussion, because again, let's consider another situation. Training has finished. Again, the players stay behind, and the coach, or rather, the player comes and tells you, "Coach, can I talk to you?" What would be your first response, and how would you conduct, or rather, how would you handle that situation? And many of you, of course, might suggest listening first, thanking them for speaking and reassuring them. And of course, these are excellent starting points, but I will just move on to the next step, where I now equip you, or rather give you just pointers on how to move along through that conversation. So the 4 R's, and this can be now the coach's practical guide. So for coaches, it would be helpful to remember 4 simple words: recognize, respond, record, and report. So by recognizing is that notice when something feels different. Remember what you already said about this. Changes in behavior, changes in mood, changes in attendance, or a disclosure. This is where now a player actively decides to come and speak to you. How do you respond? You respond by, of course, listen calmly, take the concern seriously, you avoid judgment, and most importantly, avoid making assumptions. And the third one, and I think this is where the most important one comes in, is you record. Write down what was said as soon as possible. Use the individual's own words wherever they can, and avoid adding opinions or conclusions. And of course, most importantly, also accuracy matters. Make sure you record it exactly how you are told. Not in your own words, not in different interpretations of how you feel like that scenario sort of played out, but exactly how you are told, the accurate words, in the individual's own words, without adding opinions or conclusions, and as soon as possible so that you have the accurate information. And the fourth one would be report. Follow your organization's safeguarding procedures, if any. Know who your safeguarding lead is, again, if any, because I understand, especially at the grassroots level, or even sometimes in the national level, we don't have this mechanisms in place. And know when concerns need to be escalated. And of course, remember, reporting is not about getting someone into trouble. Reporting is about getting the right people involved to protect someone from harm. So those 4 steps are simple, but they give coaches confidence when faced with situations that can feel overwhelming. Recognize, respond, record, and report. And of course, the right response can make all the difference. So let's look at now boundaries and how they protect everyone. So remember when we say that, yes, you are already in that setting with the children. In this case, you've been trusted. You dealing with them on one-to-one basis, but what are the boundaries that can be there to protect them and protect you? And there's one final point I want to make before, of course, we move on to this, is that safeguarding is not only about responding to concerns, it's also about maintaining healthy professional boundaries. And of course, sometimes coaches worry that safeguarding prevents them from building a meaningful relationship with the athletes or players. But I would rather want you to look at it differently, or see it differently. Safeguarding does not discourage positive relationships, it instead strengthens them. Because healthy coachings, again, we've already said, are built on trust, are built on respect, are built on transparency. And again, consistency also builds positive relationship and professionalism. So those same boundaries protect the athletes, but they also protect you as coaches. And simple practices can again make significant difference. So because communicating through official channels rather than private messaging. You all have a WhatsApp group, all information is put there, parents are there, coaches are there, and players are there. You don't send private messages to a player, on a separate chat where no one else sees it or even the parent is not aware of it. Avoiding situations where you're alone with a child without good reason. Yeah, because again, this is when all those bloodlines or those warning or red flags come in. Why was that coach with that minor alone, for example, in a locked room where no one else was there or no one else was aware of that, whether it was a meeting or discussion that you're having? Remember again the rule of two. Always have another person in the room. Again, being transparent with parents, telling them everything that's happening so that there's no miscommunication or any private communication between you and the child, but everything that needs to be communicated, parents are involved and they're aware of it. And again, also following agreed travel and supervision procedures, because again, you understand sometimes you might need to travel with the team, say to play a friendly match somewhere else, a different town or different school, and you're put in a situation where now you're with the children, not in the normal setting where you would be on a day-to-day. So again, these are not signs of distrust. Putting those boundaries in place doesn't mean you're not trusted as a coach. They are signs of professionalism, and the best safeguarding practice protects everyone involved. So again, just a reflection question on what kind of coach do you want to be? So as we begin our discussion together, I would like to ask again one final question before we move on, of course, to our closing reflections. Imagine that one of your athletes is experiencing a difficult situation. Not next year, not tomorrow. Would they know that they can come to you? And would they trust that you would listen to them? Would they believe you would take them seriously? And if the answer is yes, then you have already done something incredibly important. And of course, again, you have created a culture where trust exists. And when trust exists alongside professionalism, accountability, and respect, safeguarding moves beyond policy and becomes part of your everyday coaching. And that is where safe sport truly begins. So just transitioning now to our almost closing. I see we only have 15 minutes to go. We have spent much of today's session, of course, talking about responsibilities of individual coaches. But safeguarding cannot depend on one good coach. It cannot depend on one committed volunteer or one safeguarding officer. Safe sport becomes sustainable when organizations, leaders, and coaches work together to create environments where dignity, trust, and accountability are embedded on everything they do. So, of course, as we conclude today, I'd like to leave you with one thought. And of course, as we're coming closer to our conclusion of this discussion, is that what legacy do you want to leave as coaches, and what kind of sporting culture will that legacy create? So, as you move on to now leading beyond the game and the legacy of a safe coach. So of course, as I've said, as we come towards the end of our discussion, I would like us to step back from policies, procedures, case studies, and return to something much more personal. I would like us to return to the leadership aspect that we talked about earlier on. And throughout this session, we have explored safeguarding from many different perspectives. We have spoken about culture rather than compliance, about trust rather than control, about prevention rather than reaction, about dignity rather than simply avoiding harm. So if there's one thing I hope you remember is that safeguarding is not an additional responsibility placed upon coaches. It is one of the clearest expressions of what good coaching has always been or should be. And because at its heart, coaching has never simply been about producing better athletes. It has always been about developing better people. And that is why safeguarding is not separate from coaching. It is part of coaching itself. So again, as I said, as we've said earlier, is that every decision creates culture. So throughout today's session, one idea has quietly connected everything we have discussed. Every decision creates culture. Culture is not created during annual meetings. It's not created because a policy exists. It is not created by mission statements displayed on office walls. And of course, culture is created by what people experience every single day. The way we welcome new players, the way we respond when someone makes a mistake, the way we speak to referees, the way senior players treat younger players, and the way even parents are included in conversations, and the way concerns are handled. So every one of those moments, of course, teaches people something about what is acceptable. And as coaches, we sometimes underestimate how much influence we have. So we think athletes remember our tactical sessions. Sometimes they do, but I think more often they remember how we made them feel. They remember whether they felt respected, whether they felt included, whether they felt safe enough to ask questions, and whether they believed they mattered. And that is culture. And every day, whether intentionally or not, we're shaping that culture that we create. So, the legacy of a coach. And of course, let me ask you a different question. Imagine it is 20 years from today. One of your former players is being interviewed about people who influenced their life, and your name comes up. What do you hope they say? Perhaps they remember the trophies. Again, we've said this earlier about how you remember your own coach, someone who influenced you. Perhaps they remember they remember the championships that you won. And those things again certainly matter, as I said before. But I hope they remember something even greater. I hope what they would say is, Coach believed in me. Coach treated everyone fairly. Coach expected the best from us, but never humiliated us. And Coach made football a place where I wanted to be. And lastly, Coach made me feel safe. And if those are the things people remember about us and about you, then I believe we have succeeded in creating safe sport. Because again, trophies are eventually forgotten. Leagues tables change. Today you could be at top of the table. Next season you're relegated. Records are broken because you might set the record today. Your player scored what 1,000 goals. I know 1,000 is not realistic. 100 goals, say, in a season. Maybe that's in a year or in a season. But then there's always another player who would come and overperform them. But the way we make people feel often stays with them for the rest of their lives, and that is the true legacy of coaching. So again, a final reflection. We can take this and maybe hopefully I can open now briefly Q&A. I feel like I've spoken for too long, so I might not be able to go beyond the 10 minutes we have left. But we've covered a great deal, I think, over the past 1 hour, 15 minutes, if I'm being accurate. And rather than asking what you've learned, I'd like to ask something different. And in one sentence, maybe you can type it into the chat. What is one thing you will do differently at your very next training session? Could be tomorrow because of today's discussion. Perhaps you listen more carefully. Perhaps it's reviewing communication with parents. Perhaps you're going to take make sure every player feels seen. And whatever it is, I'd encourage you to make it specific. What is the one thing you will do next in your next training session because of today's conversation? So feel free to put that in the chat. What is the one thing you will do differently at your very next training session because of today's conversation? So because I think for me, as a final challenge, of course, before we finish, I'd like to leave you again with 3 questions, not for today, not for this webinar, but for every training session we lead from tomorrow onwards. And the first thing is this: did every athlete leave today session with dignity intact? The second one would be, did my behavior today strengthen the culture I want this team to become? And finally, if every coach in my club coached exactly the way I coach, would our organization become safer? And of course, I understand, or I also appreciate that those are not easy questions. They require honesty. They require you to reflect. But again, remember that leadership has never been about having all the answers. Leadership begins with being willing to ask ourselves the right questions. If every coach in this session changes one behavior, imagine the number of athletes whose experience of sport could improve. And of course, again, I would just like to finish where we began at the beginning of our session is asked why people play sport. And your answers, of course, talked about different things. And I think people come to sport because they believe it can enrich their lives. And I think for most of us, it has in one way or another. And our responsibility is also to ensure that it does. Because again, as if I'm to use the most cliche or the most used quote when it comes to sport is that sport has the power to change the world. And I have always believed that statement to be true. But today I would like to add something else, is that sport changes lives only when people feel safe enough to experience everything that sport was meant to offer. Because again, safety is not opposite of excellence. We've already said this. It is the foundation of excellence. And when people feel respected, they learn. And when they feel trusted, they grow. And when they feel safe, they perform. And when coaches consistently choose dignity over intimidation, accountability over silence, and leadership over authority, they do something far greater than develop football, or rather football players. They develop confident young people who carry those values into their families, into their schools, workplaces, and communities. And now that is how sports actually changes the world, because not only through medals, not only through championships, but through people. So as we leave this session today, I will simply ask you to remember one sentence. Every decision creates culture. Every conversation, every correction, every selection, every response you give to a concern, every act of encouragement, and every moment of leadership. Because the question is not whether we're creating culture. The question is what kind of culture our decisions create. So if each one of us leaves here committed to making one better decision tomorrow than we made yesterday, we will not only become better coaches, we will create safer teams, we will create stronger organizations and a sporting environment where every participant, especially every child, can pursue their dreams with dignity, confidence, and hope. So again, thank you for your time and thank you for your commitment to coaching, and thank you for choosing to make sport a place where everyone belongs. And I wish you every success in the important work that lies ahead. So thank you so much, and I think maybe we can take 5 minutes. So of course, little time rather than a traditional question and answer session. I'd like just to probably have some conversation. Of course, we've explored so much over the past 2 hours. But I'd like to invite you to share your reflections, experiences, and perspectives. Perhaps something we've discussed today that has challenged you, the way you think about safeguarding. Perhaps has reminded you of a mission that you've encountered in your own coaching journey, or perhaps has raised practical questions about creating safer environments within your own club or community. Again, there's no expectation that you will have all the answers. In fact, some of the most valuable learning comes from listening to another's experiences. So I will encourage you to use this opportunity for an open and, of course, honest reflection. And I'll be, of course, particularly interested to hear maybe thoughts on questions such as, what has been your biggest takeaway from today's session? What safeguarding challenges do coaches face most frequently in your own context? And of course, what practical changes can we begin implementing immediately, even where resources are limited? And how do we build a safeguarding culture rather than simply developing safeguarding policies? And lastly, what support do coaches need from clubs, federations, and governing bodies to fulfill these responsibilities effectively? So, of course, feel free to either raise your hand, of course, or share your thoughts in the chat. And of course, let's use the remainder of our time to learn from one another. And again, thank you all, of course, for your willingness to share your experiences. I hope you will. And most importantly, your commitment to creating better sporting environments. And I think one thing that has become very clear from our discussion is that, of course, safeguarding is a challenge faced by one, or rather not a challenge faced by one coach, one club or one country. It is a shared responsibility across the entire sporting community. So, of course, again, yet today's discussion has also reminded us of something equally important. Creating safer sport does not always begin with major reforms or significant resources. More often, it begins with small intentional decisions made consistently by people who care. And each of us lives here committed to one positive change in our own coaching practice. Then today's, of course, conversation will already have made a meaningful difference. And I hope that from today onwards, safeguarding no longer be seen as simply a policy or compliance obligation, but as a way of leading, coaching, and serving others with integrity. So feel free to share your thoughts here, but I would also just like to thank once again Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation, and of course Rasheedat herself, for this opportunity, or creating this opportunity for the coaches. And thank you all for your engagement, your openness, and your work you continue to do in shaping the lives of athletes through sport. So thank you very much, and I say I will take my leave in terms of
Thank you so much, Khayran. Thank you. We really appreciate you for these in-depth, profound insights that you have shared with us today on this very important topic. And yes, we already have some answers from your question about what they will do next at their next training session. Olale says, build legacy through positive communication with my players. Blessing says, promote teamwork by encouraging communication and trust. Izuchuku says, I will give all my players the right atmosphere for them to feel free in playing with not minding if they get things done or not during training or competitions. So these are some of the answers we have gotten, and I will quickly go to the question. Like you said, we do not have so much time at this point, and just to remind the coaches, please, we have a Q&A session, a Q&A feature rather, and of course we have the chat for answers like this. But to access the Q&A feature, click on the meeting tools icon in the bottom right corner of your screen. It is just beside the chat icon. When you click there, you also click the Q&A, and then you can submit your question by clicking on the Ask a Question button. So you can also tick on the post anonymously if you don't want your name to show. So let me just go to the questions we already received while the session was on. We have this one from BJ. He's asking, what are the legal and ethical responsibilities of a coach when a player discloses abuse or neglect?
Yeah, I think I sort of already answered this during the session. Of course, follow the 4 R's. How do you respond? How do you, of course, record? How do you report that? I'm not sure if I can see all the questions because quite a few. There's one that I picked out.
Okay. I would address it.
Follow, yeah, the same blessing with blessing. Oof.
Are you on the Q&A part or the chat? Which of them?
Yeah. I can see I will talk to the player. These are some of the...
Yeah, those are the responses to your question.
Yeah. I don't know if you mind just putting it down, but I would say just go back to the discussion that we had earlier on in terms of how do you respond. Because again, I would just like to reiterate again, you might not have all the answers.
Okay.
Yeah, but the most important one is being able to, of course, recognize the warning signs in the beginning, have the observation, and then, of course, when the player decides to, or rather chooses you to come and speak to you, how do you respond to them? Listening carefully, no judgment, no assumptions, and how do you now take the next steps towards that? Not making promises you cannot keep, making sure that you say, I will not speak to anyone because you do have to speak to someone. How do you take the next necessary steps forward? Understanding what are the channels that are available for you in terms of now reporting, of course, making sure that you've recorded the whatever has been shared with you accurately without, of course, putting your own words, and of course, sometimes how you come to your own conclusions as you record, but making sure that you record the way it was shared to you. and now seeing how best you can take that issue forward, whether it's within the organization, and if the mechanisms are not available within the organization, seeing how you can best help that player. So your mandate is not to investigate, but you do have the responsibility with the trust that has been given to you by the player by simply just sharing that issue with you. The one that I saw earlier, I think, is
There are two questions from Olaleye. I don't know if that's the one you're referring to. Should I read them so you can?
Yeah, because there's one that's saying, what advice to be done if the manager of an academy doesn't run it?
Okay. I think I know that one. It's from Jesse. It says, what do you advise if a manager of an academy doesn't run in line with the safeguarding policy in sports and still doesn't give you as a coach the room to express either?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And as you said earlier, safeguarding is a shared responsibility because no individual is above it. If a manager is not acting in line with the safeguarding policy, I think what you can do is first raise your concerns respectfully and constructively where appropriate. Of course, if nothing changes, or you're, of course, again, it's a reality that we acknowledge that you're prevented maybe from speaking up. Follow the academy's safeguarding reporting procedures and escalate the matter to the, of course, designated safeguarding lead officer or board or relevant governing body. In this case, would be the federation. And of course, always document your concerns factually. And remember that safeguarding is about protecting people, not protecting positions. So I go back to where I said a culture where coaches cannot raise concerns is itself a safeguarding concern. So I believe if you're already referring to a safeguarding policy, there's possibly a safeguarding mechanism in place. And if that is not done within the club, then maybe you can go through the federation if, again, they do have a safeguarding policy and mechanism in place for you to follow. So I am very cognizant of the fact that unfortunately most of our organizations, including clubs and federations, might not have these policies and mechanisms in place where people know what to do, what channels to follow. It can be quite a big challenge, to be honest. But I mean, it's part of the learning curve, and I think it's part of figuring out how to best build a safe culture in our organizations. Maybe you can pin some of them. I don't know if that's possible, but there are quite a few. And again, as I said,
questions?
My LinkedIn profile. So feel free to connect with me. Maybe ask the questions privately. I'm happy to always respond.
Okay. But do you still have some time for a few more? We have a few more questions here.
Can you see the one I think you about Gabriel, the question one, a world where people...
Alalaye, yes. The question one says, in a world where people abuse access, how do we shape positive coach-player communication culture in African football?
Yeah. And there was a museum of football environment where parents influence...
Yeah, the second question says, in a football environment where parents influence decisions through bribery and favoritism, how can safeguarding trust culture be implemented?
Yeah. For question one, in a world where people abuse access, how do you shape? I think, again, going back to the boundaries, it starts with clear boundaries. And of course, education and accountability. So if coaches should communicate with players in ways that are transparent, respectful, and appropriate. For example, avoid private and secretive communication. And in this case now, where minors are involving parents where appropriate, you ensure that there are clear codes of conduct. I think ultimately is where we're talking about culture is shaped by what leaders model, reinforce, and refuse to tolerate. So I think, again, that when you talk about positive coach-player communication, is about the transparency aspect of it and building that culture where you refuse to tolerate, say, for example, leaders who breach those boundaries. In terms of a football environment where parents influence decisions, this can be quite a challenge, to be honest, and I understand this is something that happens a lot. I think again, safeguarding and integrity go hand in hand. So trust can only exist where decisions are fair, transparent again, and based on merit. So if academies should have clear selection criteria, you have the codes of ethics, and you have, of course, now reporting mechanisms and zero tolerance for bribery and favoritism. Coaches must remain impartial and always put the best interest of the child above external pressure. So of course, again, a safeguarding culture is built when everyone knows that integrity is non-negotiable. So I think this is where now it would come down to you. Are you easily influenced? Are you going to be vulnerable to those bribes that you've been promised to pay, or are you going to follow the codes of ethics and codes of conduct that are available and follow, or rather have integrity in how you select a player based on merit rather than based on now the what has been promised to you from parents? Although I understand this can be quite challenging, but I think, again, as I say, safeguarding integrity goes hand in hand. The same thing when you talk about match fixing and those things is, are you easily influenced? Are you easily perceptible to be given something and look the other way and decide to do something that, of course, is not appropriate? Or are you going to stick your ground and say, I'm going to be fair and I'm going to choose based on, of course, understanding that also you want your team to perform the best? So is the child that you're being bribed to select actually the best option for your team, or are you just selecting them because someone paid you money to put them there, or are you just going to choose the child who actually deserves to be part of the team? So those are some of the questions that I would say falls down back to you in terms of how you would handle that situation.
There's a question from Ugochukwu. He says, how would you handle a child who has done something wrong and trusted you to tell you, and you promise not to tell anyone about it? How do you relay that to his or her parents?
I mean, like I said earlier, being honest in terms of the promise you can keep, because the moment you say you're not going to tell anyone, that already, I would say, defeats the purpose of the communication given to you, because if you're not going to tell anyone, that means nothing is going to be done. So if a child has entrusted you with that information, they've come to you and talked to you, I believe you should follow the right procedures, as I said earlier. Who do you speak to? What's the right channel for you to follow to make sure that this thing is actually, looked into, and the person in question is, for example, make sure that they don't have interaction to this child. Of course, in terms of confidentiality, you don't just go running to the same person who's been reported and told them, oh, player so-and-so came and told me this. You make sure that, yes, you maintain confidentiality, but you maintain confidentiality in the right measures that are supposed to be followed. And of course, make sure that now in this case, a parent has to be involved, where you need to, they have to be made aware of what has happened. Maybe the child has already spoken to the parent, or maybe not. But how do you now, of course, involve the right people in now finding the solution to the problem? And of course, again, speaking out always encourages someone else to speak out. So this is also something that, again, you should avoid in terms of saying you would not tell anyone, because maybe you telling someone or that player now being more confident in the sense that it's not doing something bad or feel ashamed for speaking out would encourage someone else to talk. Because again, when I go back to what I said earlier, it's not, most of these issues do not happen in isolation, because most of the time this person has already done it to someone else, probably got away with it and decided to treat someone else and someone else. So I think this is one of the, again, safeguarding reporting can also be quite complex, because we're also talking about issues to do with re-traumatization, where you don't put the victim in a position where they, for example, depending on what they went through, the trauma that they already have with the abuse or the harm that they've gone through, how do you question them? How does the investigation happen in a manner that you don't put them in a position where they feel re-traumatized, but then at the same time maintaining confidentiality, and also making sure that by maintaining confidentiality, you don't hinder the process of investigation and redress. So it can be quite complex on how you handle it, especially when you involve minors. But I think with the right mechanisms in place, with the right channels to follow. It's something that can, be done in a manner that at the end of the day, all participants or all victims are protected, and of course, something is seen to be done um, mm, following the report. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Karen, for this really enlightening session. We really appreciate you so, so much. And it was very interactive as well, as you could see in the chat.
Yeah.
So, of course, still stay with us because at this moment, I would like to introduce our host. Finally, she's with us, the Super Falcons captain, of course, the PSG star and the founder of the Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation. Welcome, Rasheedat Ajibade, all the way from Morocco. Hi, Rash.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
So good to see
Thank you. It
you.
was such an inspiring session. Such an inspiring session. Honestly, I joined in the middle of the session and I was honestly well because I didn't know I was going to meet up with the session, but I'm grateful that the part that I met was so, so inspiring. Something that really stood out for me when I joined was the part where you said, when every player leaves a training field, it's super not about just winning and losing alone, but the player leave feeling having a sense of dignity. I think that one is very, very powerful because, growing up, sometimes our coaches just open, you just say a lot of, things to us. And in the end, you don't live in the field with a sense of dignity. You're living feeling depressed, you're living feeling sad, you're living with a, not not you're not living with a full sense of confidence as well. And to a young girl or a young child that is growing up at that time, it says a lot. And I wish some of those coaches could understand the gravity of all of those things that all you just said in this call. The other stuff you said that was very powerful, creating the right culture. It's just like myself, I had to like write it down the moment you said it, because here on the Super Falcons team, we also have different leaders that have also led the team and all of that. And it's all about creating the right coaches. And I honestly think that I'm like, okay, thank God. Now somebody's just saying that to me. And we also have like a team talk where we also encourage each other, create the right culture for each other, for the team. Where the seniors cares about the juniors. I pick that down because these are something that very important, that we create the right environment for everyone to thrive. But yeah, it's a very important subject matter, not just football coaches alone, but for footballers and every other organization. So honestly, it was a powerful session, and I sincerely appreciate your time and doing this with us. We do not take it for granted. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And all the coaches are connected today. I hope you got value from this session, because for me, I did get value from it, the little that I get, because I am still going to go back to the recorded session and also take advantage of it. So thank you very much, Ms. Khayran Noor, and I sincerely appreciate. Thank you for doing this for us. Thank you for impacting the people and for your service. I sincerely appreciate you. All of us from the Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation were saying a very big thank you to you. Thank you.
Thank you of course, for this opportunity. And I, again, might have, as you said, missed the beginning, but I commend you for actually putting across these sessions. And I feel like many people would, I think, stand to benefit from this. So hopefully we can have maybe something more open where we have more coaches joining in, because I think it's something of value generally, not just this session, but all the sessions that you're putting across. This is good work. And I think, again, as I say, education is the foundation to having good governance, better sports culture, and just generally, taking African sports to the next level. So this is part of one of the great things you could do is actually making education available for most people who generally not have access to some of the sessions or knowledge platforms that are out there. So thank you, for having me, and I was incredibly honored to just be the one to be able to take you through this session, and keep up the great work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you so much, our beloved Ms. Chibugu, for all you do and for hanging up and holding up the conversation really strong as well. We sincerely appreciate you as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if I'm free to go.
My pleasure. I gained so much, I must tell you, really. Really
Honestly,
fast.
like it's so enlightening because sometimes you think it's just for the coaches alone, but it goes beyond the coach. I think every working environment should have this basic this knowledge. Because it's very important. It's all about humanity. That's all I'm just gonna say. Like it's a subject matter that is centered around humanity, and I think we should speak more about this and get people to hop on this kind of conversations more. Yeah,
Oh,
thank
you're
you.
right. Thank you so much. So, yes, I have to go now to the announcements. Coaches, I know you have benefited immensely from this session. I was taking notes and my notepad is full, honestly. So, please type the one thing that you will do differently in your coaching career after today's session. Type it in the chat. We would like to see your answers in the chat. The one thing you will do differently, of course, Khayran has already asked a similar question. The one thing you would do differently at your next training session. The one thing you do differently in your coaching career. It's pretty much the same after today's session. And I have good news. Next week, Thursday, the 23rd of July, there will be a data analysis seminar. This will be at 5 p.m. West African time. So make sure to join us. The speaker is Travis Marshall Wanchekon. He's the founder of and CEO of ASE Athletics. Travis Marshall Wanchekon, the founder and CEO of ASE Athletics. That's the speaker for next week's data analysis seminar. The registration link is already in the chat, I believe. So register and share with your friends and colleagues who could not be a part of today's session. I mean, look at all we gained. Please share with them. So I want to thank again all of the coaches that have made sure to attend all the seminars that have been organized by the Rasheedat Ajibade Foundation. Like, your commitment is immense. I really appreciate you for being a part of all these sessions and gaining so much for yourself and, of course, for the athletes that you coach, because this is not just about you. You might think it's just about you learning, but you're also doing this for your footballers, for your athletes. And it's a good thing you are doing. So don't forget to also complete the post-session Google form. Please complete the post-session Google form as well. And remember, the recording of this session will be available on the Foundation's YouTube channel. So do well to share it with other coaches, your friends, your colleagues who could not attend this session, and encourage them. Encourage them. Don't be taking all this for yourself alone. Encourage them to not miss the next session as well. Just to, ask another final reflection, because of course, one summary I want to make or take from Khayran's safeguarding in sport session is, she said, sport itself is neither safe or unsafe. It's the people that make sport safe or unsafe. And safeguarding is a culture. So there's a difference between having a safeguarding policy and building a safeguarding culture. And the big question, I saw it on her one of her slides, it says, what kind of culture are you creating? You reflect on that, and of course on the many things that Khayran has told you to reflect on as well. Remember, she said she's also on LinkedIn in case you want to reach out with any of the questions you might have as well. So I really want to appreciate you all for being a part of today's session, today's seminar, and do not miss the next one on Thursday. Thank you so much, and bye-bye. Have a great evening.